Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I'm sharing a conversation that I had with Executive Coach Dennis Volpe on resilience, self-awareness, transitioning from the military, and mastermind groups. Regardless of the situation, leaders must demonstrate resilience, and the definition and understanding of resilience is evolving every day. Hello, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to start by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us about your style of coaching.
Sure. Super excited to be here. A little bit about me. I'm a husband. I'm a dog dad. I'm a performance and transition coach. I'm an author. I'm a veteran. I'm a mentor. I'm an outdoor enthusiast. I'm a Traeger grill guy and a retired military officer. In terms of my style of coaching, it's a holistic style of coaching that utilizes the Columbia University framework as well as the Gallup Strengths coaching framework as well.
So with holistic, what all does that look like? Do you just do in the professional realm, or do you kind of pull other pieces into it as well?
No, I absolutely pull other pieces into it because you can't separate the two. Because if we're not our best self personally, we can't be our best self professionally. So I look at it from a mind, body, I call it tribe and why perspective. How are you doing in terms of mental health and mindfulness? How are you doing in terms of physical health and wellness? What about social health and connection? And then spiritual health in terms of purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? And how is that fueling you to be the best version of yourself? And then taking all of that and then looking at how you've defined success, personally and professionally, and then identifying the barriers or obstacles that may exist between where you are today and where you want to be in the future. And looking at that holistically to say, okay, this is where we're at, this is where we want to go. These are the tools that I have. These are the tools that I need. Let's go and let's get it done.
I really think it's important for coaches to look at all these different aspects because, like you said, it's how we show up in one area is going to bleed over to how we show up in other areas too. So that's perfect. Have you noticed a change in kind of what people need from you over the last year with COVID and all of that? Have you noticed that the needs of your clients have shifted, or maybe it's kind of been more in one area or another?
I've actually looked at kind of the barriers to success over the past couple of years, and I thought there was going to be a big change because of the pandemic, but there really hasn't been. And what do I mean by that? Well, the big barriers to success that I have seen based on the coaching that I've done across the spectrum, whether that's for transitioning military veterans, emerging leaders, proven leaders that are in developing talent programs, or senior leaders at the chief of staff or GM or director level, it's been a lack of self-awareness about what really matters and how folks have defined success. A misunderstanding of the difference between change and transition. Change being what happens to us, transition what we do about it, change being an external force, and transition being an internal process to actually move in a positive direction. A misunderstanding of the difference between resilience, and I know that's something we may talk about later, and endurance, and self-management. And an inability to do that because of a lack of self-awareness, because of a confusion between change and transition, and a misunderstanding of resilience and endurance. And the other part was a fear to ask for help. That's probably the one area that has changed because of the pandemic. What I've seen is that people actually are starting to ask for help, realizing that, I like to say, life is a team sport, and the work from home, revolution, if you will, has provided people the insight that they've needed to say, I can't do this on my own. So what do I need to do about that? So if one thing has changed, it would be that.
I love the way you said that too, because with being in a virtual world now, where we also kind of get these glimpses into other people's homes and their lives and these other pieces, I think it's also really reminding us that people are humans, which we can forget in the workplace, but also that like everybody needs a little bit of help. So I think it almost like kind of creates a little bit of a safe space for more people to be like, no, I absolutely need some help with this. This is too much.
And finding an opportunity to do that, to actually, in a virtual work from home environment, how do you actually provide the time, space, and opportunity for that human connection? Whether it's a virtual coffee or really just an ability to connect and not talk about work stuff. Talk about the stuff that you would actually talk about if you were going to lunch with somebody or going to grab a coffee with somebody. And very often that wouldn't be work stuff. So giving yourself the opportunity to do that is really important.
Yes, and that's such an excellent point there too, where I think sometimes people are also experiencing burnout right now because when you work from home, then people kind of get this idea that like, what are the hours? Right? So there's that. So like, should I be working 24/7? But also like, you don't sit at your desk for 8 hours a day. That would be an intense job, right? You connect with people, you are engaging with other people and learning about who they are. So yeah, people can still find that in the virtual environment. I think that's what also keeps people connected. And like, kudos to the leaders who have been doing a good job of that.
Oh, absolutely. Because we're humans. And part of the human experience is connection. So if you don't take the time to connect with people who share similar values, who share similar priorities and expectations, but also who are going to challenge you to think differently, to consider things, and give you some diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, so that way you're better today than you were yesterday, and you're better tomorrow than you were today, then you're absolutely doing yourself a disservice.
And earlier you'd mentioned the difference between a transition and a change. And you wrote Transition on Purpose.
I did.
So can you tell us about that and what inspired it? And then let's also talk more about that transition versus change piece.
Sure. So Transition on Purpose, it's a personal story, but it's not necessarily a unique story. In the book itself, there's two parts. The first part is the story about my transition from military service. And then the part two is utilizing the Columbia coaching framework in order to talk about transition differently. So what inspired it? Well, I was in the military for 20 years and never planned to have a military career. And then somebody that had a career by happenstance. And initially, I was planning to get out of the military, utilize the leadership experience and opportunities that I had, and go into law enforcement because my father was a retired police officer, and I had a lot of service academy friends that were in federal law enforcement. So as a result, it kind of made sense. But when it was time to do that, the opportunity wasn't there. There was actually a hiring freeze during that time. So the Navy was really nice to me and said, hey, what do you think about getting a master's degree in leadership and extending on shore duty at the Naval Academy for an extra year to teach leadership? And I was like, that sounds great. And fast forward 15 more years, then I was a warship captain. But what happened during that 15 years? I got myopically focused on my professional life and lost focus on a lot of other things. So the role that I had was my identity, and my identity was my role. So what I did was who I was, and who I was what I did. You really take on, if you're not careful, and I wasn't, particularly as a ship captain, when you actually don't even have a name anymore. It's either captain, sir, or you know what? You're actually the ship's name, because that's how they ding you on. There I was, having lost focus on pretty much everything, but on top of my professional career. everything going exactly the way it needed to go until it didn't. So you're on top of your game, and literally at the time on top of the world, deployed in support of the 2014 Sochi Olympics. And what we were doing was important enough that it was getting briefed to the highest levels of our military and civilian chain of command. And then we had to check off station to go get some, I like to say, some gas and groceries. So sailed across the Black Sea and entered a harbor and had an operational mishap, ran aground, broke the propeller. 2 weeks later, I was relieved of command. What that means, if you're not in the military, it means I got fired. So I went from being on top of the mountain to being in probably one of the most lonely valleys you can be in, personally and professionally. That's where Transition on Purpose came from, because I had to figure out who I was, what mattered to me, why it mattered to me, and what I was going to do about it. And that's why resilience is so important to me, because resilience is not just about bouncing back. And you hear that very often. Oh, resilience is about bouncing back. I disagree. Resilience is about bouncing forward. It's actually about taking life, the adversity, the challenges, the lessons, and then utilizing them to learn and be better from the experience. So that's what resilience is all about. That's what's incorporated in the Transition on Purpose book. And I call it a Transition on Purpose mindset. One that strives to be self-aware. One that absolutely looks to explore new, different, and exciting things. And one that is action-oriented and looking to actually get things done, so that way your deeds speak for themselves. So probably a very long answer to a very short question.
That was perfect. And I think you brought up so many important things in there too, where a lot of times in certain industries, and this can happen to anybody, it's not just a military thing, it happens a lot in the military, but we get so focused on who we are as a military member that a lot of other things fall by the wayside. And what's unique, I think, about the military with that is that the military does this thing where it's we're an Army family, we're a military family, we're these different things, and they make it seem like you're a lot more well-rounded than maybe you actually are. Because I think that's one of the things too that I see in a lot of people who are transitioning, where this identity crisis almost stacked on top of trying to find a different career and a different job. When something stops abruptly, and it can be abruptly like your situation, or it can be abruptly like sometimes people are they're in for 25 years, they drop their own retirement and they're still like, oh, that was fast. Like, that's, what do I do next? So I think that piece of, no matter what industry you're in, realizing that when you're achieving and when you have that high achievers mindset, it's so easy for just everything else to fall away, and you think you're well balanced until it topples.
And that's absolutely correct. And, my transition from military service wasn't immediate. But I knew, because of the military justice system, that I was never going to be able to have command again. So I was not going to be able to do what I wanted to do. So it made sense to look at opportunities to do other things. When you're invested in an organization, and then you realize that the organization doesn't much care for you as it once did, yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow when your role and your identity are rolled up into one. So figuring out, okay, who is this guy? And I have other coaches that ask me, well, why do you focus so much on values? And I have a really good friend. She asked me that for about 3 years. One day it clicked for her because she didn't understand why she was out of alignment. And it was because of what she valued in the work she was doing and how she was doing it, that there was this dissonance that existed. And once she reflected on her values, she's like, now I get it. But why is it even more important, I think, for military men and women, is because we're given our values when we join the military. We're given them, they're defined for us, and you know what? We get to learn them from push-ups and all that other stuff. And they're great at an organizational level. They're not very helpful at a personal level to make informed decisions about what you're going to do with your life. So honor, courage, and commitment, absolutely helpful. They're part of me. but they don't help me make decisions about my career and my life. So that's why one of the things that I always start any coaching engagement with is, tell me what you value and why do you value that? And how is that going to guide your decision making?
Values at an organizational level, of course, great. Also though, sometimes when people are talking about certain values, I'm like, shouldn't every human have that? Like, shouldn't every person be honest or have integrity? But also at the personal level, it's more like, somebody said, it's more of like a truths match than it is like if we're talking about values, right? Because values are kind of these like big things and you need to know what you value. How someone identifies or would describe integrity or thinks integrity is could be different than how I do.
Right.
Based on experience and perspective and just kind of how people grew up. When it gets to that like personal level, there are these things that are ingrained in us, right? Like loyalty, duty, like yes, of course. But then also on a personal level, like, but what is that like, then how does that show me why I'm unhappy?
And being able to do that in a very, open and honest way is important. I mean, for me now, when people say, Dennis, what do you value? It's really easy. Autonomy, impact, connection, and security. Autonomy to do the things that I want to do with the people I want to do them with, when I want to do them. Like having conversations like this is important to me, right? Because guess what? It also allows me to think about the next two values. Impact, the ability to empower, enlighten, and equip others to be the best version of themselves and to positively impact their environment, whether that's at home, work, within their community, you name it. And then connection, the ability to interact with amazing people like you who are going to challenge me to think differently and provide a diversity of thought, a diversity of experience, and a diversity of perspective that I may not have. And then finally, security. And I truly define that as the physical, emotional, and financial safety that I need and the people who matter to me need in order to have connection, impact, and autonomy.
Yes. And those, when you say those and as you describe them, it's very easy to see where if you're dealing with something or a decision needs to be made, you're not going to be like, I could chase this or whatever. It's like, no, this is important to me, right? I know that I'm out of alignment when these things aren't being met.
And, when that spidey sense, when the hair on the back of your neck stands up because you're not in alignment, how do you make a decision? Do you make it with your eyes wide open or your eyes wide shut? Are you making it consciously or unconsciously? You know what? That's not aligned with my values right now. But you know what? My priority right now is this. So that's what I need to do with the understanding that it's going to take away from my autonomy. But that's okay because I've identified what my priorities are right now. Now, do you always want your priorities and your values to align? Absolutely. Sometimes will they not? Yes.
And I think that is also so important too, because sometimes what matters to us right now is something like life happens, right? And different things are thrown at us. So sometimes we have to make a different decision, but also like it doesn't have to be permanent, right? Like we can do something that is a priority that maybe is not 100% in alignment with one or more of our values, and it's a temporary thing. You let things be what they are and last as long as they're supposed to last. We act like we can't let it go because we're like, oh, but we should be loyal. And I really liked earlier too how you said the resilience versus endurance. And I also loved your defining resilience as not this like ability to bounce back, right? Because we don't want to always be the same as we were. We want to take on things and move forward. So I'd love to hear more about how that concept came to you and kind of what inspired it.
The sport of triathlon, how did that come into being? Well, I had a mentor when I had all of that professional stuff going on in my life. He said, Dennis, you need to actually get focused on something other than your current reality. Otherwise, you're going to get consumed by it. And it wasn't necessarily a great choice, but when I got home from that conversation, I was responding to an email and I literally had a pop-up ad. I think the computer was reading my mind or something. It was Ironman Miami 70.3. And it was like, this is for you. And I'm like, okay, great, let's do it. And I was a surface warfare officer, so I spent a lot of time at sea, but one of the things that I didn't spend a whole lot of time on was swimming. And I have a lot of friends that give me a hard time. They're like, why is swimming so hard for you in the Navy? Correct. I was on ships. Things have had to go horribly, horribly wrong for me to be swimming in the water. And just because of the reality of life, I didn't do a lot of cycling either. The only thing that I was good at was running. So by me clicking on and paying for a half Ironman was dumb. But what did it do though? It actually gave me time. It gave me space to figure a lot of things out. So if we go back to mind, body, tribe, and why, that time and space in the pool, on the bike, on runs, gave me time for mental clarity and mindfulness. Yeah, if you're swimming, biking, and running on a regular basis, you're gonna obviously have increased physical wellness. You can't do a triathlon by yourself. Well, some people can, but I couldn't. I had a really good collection of friends that we actually trained together, spent time together, and everything else. So then I had that social connection. And because of all of that, I was really able to distill what really mattered to me and what I wanted to do. And the cool part, at least in my opinion, of the whole sport of triathlon is that there's 3 separate events, right? You've got your swim, you've got your bike, and you've got your run. And you have 2 concrete transitions in that. And what those, or the sport, provides is a real life opportunity to see what happens when you're not present in the present. Because if you don't pay attention to what you're doing in the swim, you may not get to the bike and you may not get to the run. Same thing if you're on a bike ride. So transition is a process, and as a result, there's going to be things that impact you, and that's what change is. And transition, like I said, is what you do about it, what you focus on. And that goes back to, well, what do you value? What do you want to prioritize? What's your win? What's important now? And then what do you expect of yourself and those who you spend time with, whether that's personally, professionally, or both? And that's that whole triathlon experience, as well as a few others, got me thinking about this whole transition on purpose rather than transition on accident. Well, what does it really look like? Well, I came up with a 9-step process that utilized the Columbia coaching framework. And the Columbia coaching framework is absolutely all about human performance. 3 basic and simple questions. But as a coach yourself, you know that they're simple questions, but they're not easy to answer. So what's up? What matters? What's next? Well, what does that look like in terms of transition? Well, let's talk about your reality right now. What does that look like? But how have you defined success? And then what do you value? And then looking at it in terms of, all right, based on your reality, let's talk about boundaries. Let's talk about priorities. Let's talk about expectations. And then once we've explored that, so you have the awareness piece, you have the exploration piece, and then you've got the action piece, which looks at, well, who do you need to know? Who needs to know you, and how do you need to connect? And once you have that awareness, once you have that exploration, and once you have that team, well, let's talk about your transition toolkit, which goes back to, what are you doing for mental health and mindfulness? What are you doing for physical health and wellness? What are you doing for social health and connection and your sense of purpose? And how are you making that part of your routine? Because I firmly believe we have like 4 internal batteries. And 1 is your mental battery. 2 is your physical battery. 3 is your social battery. And then you've got your spiritual battery in terms of what is that energy inside of you that is propelling you to where you want to go. And then finally, let's talk about your plan. Notice that the plan is last. Because very often we're really good, well, let's figure out what we're going to do. And you know this as a military person. How can you shoot at a target you haven't identified? So identifying the target, identifying the objective, defining success is always step number 1. And defining the plan to get there is the last step. And then identifying, well, how are we really going to keep track of this on a regular basis, on a recurring basis? That's one of the reasons why a really good friend of mine and I are starting a Transition on Purpose Mastermind Masterclass on the 9th of June for folks that are going through career or life transition and they're looking for more focus, they're looking for more fulfillment and more resilience in their life, and they want support to help them get there and also provide some accountability along the way.
So for someone who's never experienced a mastermind group, like what is that and how are they helpful?
So a mastermind is, well, there's all different kinds. And if you're looking for a mastermind, again, I would say start with the objective. What are you looking for? Are you looking for personal development? Are you looking for professional development? Are you looking for networking? Are you looking for business development? Are you looking for career or life transition? Because there's all sorts of mastermind groups out there. So if you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to get overwhelmed. It took me a long time to find my first mastermind to be a participant in. And after I found that, then it was a lot easier to find the other ones that made sense for me. Because I had a process. Well, what am I solving for right now? And what do I want in terms of what are the types of people I want to be around? Who do I want to spend time with? How much time do I want to spend with them? And how much do I want to invest in terms of my talent and in terms of my treasure? Because most masterminds, particularly the really good and impactful ones, actually cost money. You know, the first part of it. And I've been involved with masterminds for over 4 years now. I'm involved in a coaching mastermind with other Columbia coaches for a professional development kind of thing. And we revisit the Columbia coaching framework. We coach each other. So that way there's not only is there connection, but there's also competence building as part of the process. I'm also in an Iron Sharpens Iron mastermind that really looks at the whole person, but more on the personal side of things. And I'm also in a service academy mastermind, but that's business development. And it's actually called the Service Academy Business Network, and for business development purposes. So knowing what you're trying to solve for, and then identifying for you what makes the most sense in terms of time, in terms of your investment in talent and your investment in treasure in terms of money is important. And you know, the other part of it is what do you want to get out of it? And how have you actually defined success? Because I've been involved in a couple of other, they called them masterminds, but they were really more like support groups. And they weren't as action oriented as I needed them to be. We talked about being a Gallup strengths coach. Well, when I look at my strengths, if you look at the 4 domains of Gallup strengths, I'm an executor. I can get things done, and I can influence, and I can build relationships. What I'm not good at is strategic thinking, in terms of thinking bigger, thinking differently. So I look for opportunities to connect with people who are going to challenge me to do that and provide me with ideas that I would never think about on my own. I don't need their help executing them at all. I just need different ideas. And that's what masterminds have provided me with, is the opportunity to think differently, to think bigger, and move in a positive direction.
I love mastermind groups. They are so impactful. And like you said, finding the one that can serve you for where you are in your life right now is the most important piece. Otherwise, it really does feel like a waste of all of your resources.
Yeah.
But I also like that one that I personally have is just an ongoing one. It is just a forever mastermind, but very action oriented and stuff like that. But I also really like the ones that are temporary, 4 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever. And those ones can be really fun too, because you really find out how much progress you can make, especially when you're accountable to this group who's also accountable to you. So they're just really empowering. I love mastermind groups.
And that's exactly why the Shift Transition on Purpose Mastermind is 6 months. For that very reason. Because if you want to make change, if you want to transition and do something about the change that's come into your life or your career or both, it's not going to happen in a day. And it's probably not going to happen in a week. It's going to happen over time. And what does a mastermind give you? Well, it provides insight that you may not have considered. It's going to give you different perspectives because of the experience of the people in the group. And it's also going to provide support from those very people. And then, like you talked about, there's an accountability aspect to it. Holding yourself accountable as well as holding other people accountable. And I'm excited to get to do it with another Columbia trained coach who actually looks at where we both specialize in transition, but we come at it from two different directions, from a retired military perspective and then from a business perspective. So there's experiences and perspective and insight that we can provide as coaches to the mastermind participants that they might not otherwise get from other experiences.
And I love that, I love all the perspective taking in that as well, because sometimes you want somebody who's done something similar, but then you also, of course, want other input. And I think that something that's so important about whether you have a transition coach or they do the transition mastermind or anything like that is that this accepting that you almost have to go through the stages of loss, like the stages of grief in transitioning, right? You have to accept that this is the loss of a career, of where you thought you could go or what you thought you could be.
100%. And I'm a transition coach. And when I moved from Ohio to New Hampshire, I knew one physical person in the Great Granite State. I didn't understand the business landscape. I didn't understand a lot of the fact that even though it's not a big state, but it's like one big small town. I hired a transition coach, and I worked with a transition coach it was about 6 months to really gain the insight and perspective that I needed that I didn't have. I firmly believe that if you work with a coach and that coach has not been coached themselves, you might want to question the credibility of that coach because they actually haven't experienced the art and the science of coaching. That's my personal opinion.
I agree with that completely because all of the best coaches that I've had have pretty actively had coaches throughout all different aspects of their careers.
Right.
Because it not only says that they have experienced that, they know what it's like to be coached, because being a coach and also being coached is emotionally exhausting sometimes. Also, it shows how seriously they take their profession. Right? They know that the best way to grow, which I totally believe as well, the best way to grow is by having a coach. And so if I'm asking someone else to do that, well, then why am I not doing that? Of course I'm going to do that. What inspires you about coaching?
Well, when I think about coaching itself, by at least my definition, coaching is about unlocking human performance. So what inspires me about coaching? Well, I first got into performance coaching, not in the same arena that I'm currently in. If we rewind the clock many, many years ago, when I was a leadership instructor at the Naval Academy, I was also a rugby coach. And I got to see what it looked like to unlock human performance on a rugby pitch. Seeing what happens when individuals realize their potential and they see that and you feel that, and then you actually see it even expand from there. And that's what got me interested in coaching to begin with. But then you fast forward into performance and transition coaching, whether that's for transitioning military veterans, small business owners, or developing talent program folks, or senior leaders in corporate America. When I get what inspires me the most is when those aha moments happen, when that behavior change happens, and when you see people making commitments and taking action on what matters to them. I get inspired when people realize their full potential.
So where can people find you and learn more about your work and your upcoming projects and all that amazing stuff that you're working on?
Best place to find me is on my website, Dennis-Volpe or -Volpe.com, or an easier way to get there is transitiononpurpose.com, and that'll take you to my personal website and you can learn more there. We could also connect on LinkedIn. First place, check out my website. There's also some resources there. I've also created an e-workbook that takes all of the questions from my Transition on Purpose book but also some of the stuff that I've learned since then as a performance and transition coach to allow you to think bigger and differently about transition. So it's 36 questions that you could take, think about, reflect on, not in one sitting. So it's going to take some time. If you take the time and you truly drill into those questions, it'll provide you with the self-awareness that you need to explore different things and take action on what really, really matters to you.
And I have to give you a shout out for your videos on LinkedIn. I think they're awesome. I think they're informative, and I really appreciated how, like, you did one about self-awareness, and I love the perspective, and I also appreciate the consistency that I see you posting videos. I always know where I can go for perspective and insight.
Good, awesome. I try to have one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I try to keep them less than 90 seconds in length. And so if you just need a quick hit around, what do I need to be thinking about? Whether you're that new team leader, or you're interested in strength-based leadership, you're interested in masterminds, you're interested in transition coaching. I try to mix things up a little bit, but I also know that I am not an expert in everything, but there are certain areas that I am, purposeful about, and one of those is transition, one of those is masterminds, and another one of those is team effectiveness.
Thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been really awesome. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate the opportunity and the time. So thank you for what you're doing for the coaching profession, and I'm excited to be connected with somebody who's doing amazing things.
In this episode, Dennis and I discussed a lot of leadership concepts and tools. To explore these concepts more for your own self-development, I would invite you to journal about a few questions and a quote. The first question is, how do you define resilience, and how has your definition of it evolved over the past couple of years? The second question is, if you were to join a mastermind group, what would you want it to cover, and what kind of support would you like or expect from the group? The quote I have for you is from Amelia Earhart, who said, "The most effective way to do it is to do it." Thank you for listening to this episode of Equipping Leaders. All of the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on my website, NatashaCheyenne.com, as well as timestamps to help you get right to the resource that you are looking for. On the website, you can also find a weekly leadership journal entry, a resource page with challenges and downloadable content, a place to sign up for my weekly newsletter, and an upcoming leadership platform full of workshops. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha, and on Twitter and Facebook at Natasha Cheyenne. If you'd like to hear more about a specific topic, please reach out and let me know. Join me next week for another episode.